Hey class, I wanted to make a quick video about kind of your tasks for this week, as well as to kind of give you a general overview of what you should be learning during week one. So what you will need to do for week number one, and remember that this is a very fast paced, so I know that this kind of will seem overwhelming, but I promise you we'll make it through. So for this first week, your first task is really to read the syllabus thoroughly. So that way you have an understanding of the assignments that are due, what's coming up, and the important dates. I would like for you to complete a brief introduction about yourself. Who are you? Where are you in kind of your educational journey? Why are you taking this class? That sort of thing. Your next task is really to read the first 3 chapters in your textbook. Look over the chapter slides that I have posted. As you might have already found out, my slides are very, very detailed. I put in a lot of information in the slides because this is an online class. So I really do feel like you guys are missing out on having an in-person lecture. So I kind of overcompensate for having a lot of information on the slides. Every chapter, I also have a couple of short kind of YouTube videos. I really do think that it's important to link what we're learning to kind of present day discussions, as well as kind of present day psychological information. So that's why there's always a couple videos. In addition, I would like you to read the short, I think it's an 8-page article on women in psychology. What this article is sort of a brief overview of kind of the first women who worked as psychologists and kind of their battle, as well as their kind of collective experience of being kind of the first pioneers in the field of psychology. By Sunday night, please try to get your first bookmark done. Bookmark number 1 should be covering chapters 1 through 3, as well as women in psychology. Be sure to complete exam number 1 for this week. Like I said, it will cover chapters 1 through 3, your women in psychology article, and your videos. So make sure that you're watching your videos and taking notes over your videos. For the exams, you do not have to worry about a time limit, but once you start, you have to finish. You can use any of your notes, anything at all during that exam. And if you guys want some extra credit, I do have an opportunity for you guys to get, I think, 5 extra credit points. All you would need to do is tell me what psychological disorder you intend to write about for your psychological disorder paper. In return, I will tell you if this is a good or bad choice for you, as well as explain to you about what time period your paper should start in, as well as give you some kind of helpful tips for your paper. So let's get started. So chapter 1 is really all about why are we studying the history of psychology? Why is it important? Why is this a class that the APA says you should have it before you can even start a PhD program? I really enjoy this kind of subject. It teaches you quite a few things. 1, it's going to teach you about the different types of knowledge. Most of you have probably assumed there's one type of knowledge. We learn about different things in classes, that is knowledge. But what this class really tries to do is break down the different types of knowledge. So really there are 4 different types of knowledge: scientific, popular, ideological, and legal. What this means, kind of breaking it down, would be scientific knowledge. This is the information that we learn from scientific research. That could be psychological research. It could be research in really any discipline, but it's the information that we learn from research and with a scientific base. The most common type of knowledge is popular knowledge. So it's what we learn from our peers, what we learn from the news, what we learn from kind of the world around us. What are kind of popular beliefs that people have? What are beliefs that our culture has? Kind of bleeding into culture is this kind of idea of ideological knowledge, or kind of more of a value-based system of knowledge. So where typically you see these value-based types of knowledges is when we talk about religion. So when we talk about Christianity, Judaism, both of these religions had major impacts into the world of psychology. Christianity and Judaism also have their own set of beliefs, ideologies that are considered in that area fact and knowledge that people need to learn. So anything that is kind of based on religion, values, cultural ideas, that would be considered ideological knowledge. The final one is going to be legal knowledge. So things that we have learned from the legal system. A common one that you will see when talking about legal knowledge would be laws associated with psychology. So let's say in the early 1900s, people who were considered mentally ill, mentally handicapped were sterilized against their will. And that was purely based on legal ramifications of what we believed was psychologically necessary at the time. So at the time, that would be considered a legal form of knowledge in the sense that it involves laws and ideas about the culture that we're living in. Another huge part about chapter 1 is really kind of examining the factors that contributed to the development of psychology. Our textbook does a great job at kind of explaining the social context in which psychology has happened. Psychology did not start in a vacuum. It was a product of the people, the resources, the social climate at the time, and the academic tradition behind it. So at one point, there were no psychology departments at universities. How did that happen? How did that start? This book does a really good job at kind of explaining all of the factors, and at each time period helped bring psychology to what it is today. I also try to do kind of a psychologist spotlight through various chapters. This is probably a psychologist that you haven't heard of. It's typically not one of your big name guys, but my psychology spotlight of the week is Dr. Alfred Kinsey. I would like you guys to know a little bit more about him, his contribution to psychology, as well as the idea of kind of social controversy. So at the time, Dr. Kinsey was very controversial. He was really one of the first psychologists in order to study sexual behavior, and specifically the sexual behavior of women. So when he made his first book, The Psychology of Sexual Behavior of Men, people loved the book. It was revolutionary. He was touted as a great mind. When he created his second book, The Psychology of Sexual Behavior of Women, it really got the rug was pulled underneath him. He was considered a sexual deviant. He really had his kind of career crumble around him. But he is considered a founder in the world of sexual behavior and psychology. There is a Kinsey Institute that is still running today, and it is at IU Bloomington. So if you are ever in that area in the Midwest, be sure to check out the Kinsey Institute. I've also put in a trailer to the movie called Kinsey. So it is a major motion picture. Liam Neeson is playing Kinsey. It is a great movie, and I hope you guys check it out. When we move on to chapter 2, this focus is really going to be kind of the start of history to approximately 1200 BC. That is a huge, huge portion of history, as you can imagine. In later chapters, we might just be covering 10, 20 years. This is really covering a millennia. So think about, we are covering a lot of ideas in this area. but really try to think about early psychological knowledge. At this time, the focus of psychological knowledge was really on behavior. What causes behavior? What kind of emotions happen as part of your behavior? That was really the only aspect of psychology that people thought to study about at that time. I also want you guys to be aware of there's going to be different sets of people and civilizations that we study. So the first civilization is Mesopotamia, followed by ancient Egypt, Greek, and the Roman civilization. So really, I want you guys to take a look at what did these people believe? How did they get to understanding this knowledge? And who were the people who made these early contributions to psychological knowledge? Who did people listen to for their ideas? I know it's not a great picture on this slide, but on the kind of the left-hand side, this would be considered what's called an amulet. So in ancient Egypt, people wore these amulets. This one specifically is for the heart. In ancient Egypt, they believed that all of your cognition, all of your emotions, everything was really housed in the heart. And after you had passed away, your heart was taken out and put in this amulet as well. So people would wear amulets. People, once they were kind of mummified and buried, there were different amulets as well. But really kind of the focus of psychology at the time was really focused on the chest and the heart, and not necessarily a squishy thing in your head that they just thought kind of held your eyeballs into place. This chapter also does a really great job of kind of exploring the world of early religion and psychology. So in certain traditions, such as Hinduism, Buddhism, that sort of thing, they really focused in on the life cycle. One could say that the life cycle is really a branch of developmental psychology. So developmental psychology has taken a lot of information from ancient Hindu civilization, ancient Buddhism civilization, that sort of thing, in order to get their information. Catholicism also had a huge, huge impact on the field of psychology during this time. The concepts of guilt and sin, the concept of having a soul, as well as the life cycle, were all kind of explained through the eyes of religion, but as we know today are really kind of psychological. Next, we will move on to chapter 3. So roughly this chapter covers 1400 to 1700 BCE. It covers the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Scientific Revolution, a huge portion of history. But like I said, we are just taking history in general and focusing in on psychology. So during this time period, when we kind of look at those 4 sources of knowledge, this portion of history, people were really focused in on popular knowledge as well as ideological knowledge. Psychology was really focused on superstitions, beliefs, and they were largely religion focused. So you kind of start to see people start talking about witchcraft during this time, as well as sleepwalking. So people at the time believed that if you were sleepwalking, it was related to some sort of issue that you were having with the devil. So if you've ever heard of the phrase lunatics, that kind of term is coming from this time period. If you were a lunatic, it was because you were affected by the lunar cycle and you were sleepwalking and having conversations with the devil during that time period. Another huge thing that I want you guys to really dive into is going to be Robert Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy. This is really the precursor to the DSM today. So it was really our first book that was written to diagnose, to make kind of psychological ideas. It explains the causes, the symptoms of mental illnesses. I will say in general, the majority of this book is focused in on anxiety and mood problems, but really kind of understand that this was a huge milestone for the world of psychology in the sense that it really was our first kind of diagnostic book. So many of you are interested in clinical psychology, where you have seen many DSMs in your life. This is going to be the precursor to all of that. So take a look at the work of Robert Burton. Another huge portion of this chapter is going to be just kind of a litany of different scholars and their theories. It can be a little bit overwhelming, and then the fact that there are so many different scholars. What I really want you guys to get a grasp of is kind of what were the main ideas coming out of this time period. What were the people, the everyday people, being told about life, about psychology, about anxiety, about mood problems, about what it means to have a soul? What is a soul? What is the purpose of life? All of those things. Really just sort of grasp like the main ideas. I am not worried about you guys memorizing every single name and every single theory that they came up with. I really want you to get a grasp of what were the main ideas that were coming out of this time period. And finally, our last kind of main topic from this week is going to be about women in psychology. So this is kind of my first push into inclusion for this class. You are going to read an article about placing women back into psychology. So as you guys will keep reading the textbook, you guys will see that the majority of the book, as well as really any history of psychology book, is that the people mentioned are predominantly men and are kind of from Europe or the United States. So there has been kind of this resurgence in this area to make sure that we understand where the women were, where minorities were. So this article does a really great job of kind of explaining who are these women, what were the common hardships and experiences that they had after graduating with a degree in psychology, what did their careers look like, and how are they different from their male counterparts, as well as what did they study. So on the left-hand side, I want you to kind of know her name. Her name is Mary Calkins. She studied under William James, who was pretty much considered kind of the first American psychologist who had his first kind of American lab for psychology. She studied at Harvard University. She would have been the first woman in order to have a PhD in psychology from Harvard, but Harvard would not give her a PhD, purely and only based on the fact that she was a woman. At the time, Harvard had said, this is only a male school. They allowed her to take classes. They allowed her to pay money for classes. She wrote a dissertation. She was in the research lab gathering all of that information. In the final hour said, no, because you're a woman, you cannot do this. So this is not an uncommon story for this time period. She was really kind of the first one to make it through that process of trying to earn a PhD in psychology and the obstacles that she faced. Most women after graduating typically were not researchers. They were seen as more research assistants. They were not getting jobs at major universities. They were getting jobs at women's colleges, community colleges, high schools, that sort of thing. And they were kind of expected to quit or take a back seat in order to start a family. They were not seen as career and family women. So they really did have quite a few obstacles in their time. In order to kind of help you understand this a little bit more, I have posted 2 videos, obstacles for women in psychology, to give you kind of more of an overview, as well as a video that is explaining, are women bad at science? I think you know the answer to that, but it's good to have a little bit more kind of psychological information on it. So like I said, if you guys need anything, have any issues at all, please do not hesitate to ask, reach out. I'm happy to help. I hope you have a great week. Bye.